It all started with an envelope. Thin, beige, the color of defeated dreams and cubicle walls. If a piece of paper could sigh with existential boredom, this would be it. Before that beige harbinger of doom ruined a perfectly good Tuesday, my life was simple. My world was my garage, a two-car sanctuary that smelled perpetually of sawdust and coffee. I'm a woodworker, not the kind that whittles little birds, though I respect the craft, but the kind that wrangles 8-foot slabs of black walnut into submission, turning them into tables and bookshelves that will outlive us all. There's an honesty to it, a satisfaction that a spreadsheet could never give you. You take something raw and chaotic, and you give it form, purpose. My partner in this noble endeavor was Vanna White. Not the game show hostess, but my Ford Transit van. She was a 10-year-old workhorse, white, with a few character-building dings and a driver's side door that groaned like a haunted house. Inside, though, she was a masterpiece of organization. Every tool had its place, every screw its compartment. She wasn't just a vehicle. She was my mobile command center, the key that started my livelihood every single morning. The lettering on her side was discreet, just my name and business, Alex's Artisan Woodcraft, in a tasteful dark gray font. It was smaller than the decal on a soccer mom's minivan proclaiming the academic prowess of her honor roll student. That Tuesday, I was feeling particularly good. I'd just finished a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf for a client, a monster of cherry wood with a rolling ladder and everything. It was the kind of piece you see in old libraries and movies, the kind that makes you want to own more books just to fill it. After carefully wrapping it in blankets and loading it into Vanna's spacious interior, I felt that familiar hum of a job well done. The sun was out, the air was crisp, and I had a check with my name on it waiting for me. I decided to grab the mail before I left. And there it was. Tucked between a coupon booklet for a pizza place I'd never order from, and a letter addressed to the previous homeowner who had been dead for 3 years, was the thin beige envelope from the Creekwood Commons Homeowners Association. My first thought was that it was a reminder about the annual Fall Fiesta, an event whose sole purpose seemed to be crowning the resident with the most disturbingly large decorative gourd. I tore it open with mild indifference. My eyes scanned the page, my brain struggling to process the corporate soulless jargon. Notice of violation. Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph C. And then the gut punch. Parking of commercial vehicle. Stapled to the letter was a grainy black and white photograph of Vanna, parked innocently in my own driveway. A thick red circle, drawn with the shaky hand of pure, unadulterated spite, was around the lettering on her side. At the bottom of the page, in bold, unforgiving letters, fine, 150 hundreds, $150. For parking the tool I use to pay the mortgage that funds the HOA fees that pay the salary of the person who fined me. The Ouroboros of suburban misery. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was a profound, almost comical sense of bewilderment. A commercial vehicle? It's a van. A white van. Half the families in this neighborhood drive SUVs the size of a Sherman tank, plastered with dealership logos, university crests, and stick-figure families boasting of their various extracurriculars. Was Vanna suddenly a semi-truck? Did she have a smokestack I hadn't noticed? Was she hauling industrial waste instead of bespoke cabinetry? I immediately called my best friend, Dave. "You're not going to believe this," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "The HOA fined me." "For what? Did your grass exceed the maximum allowable height by a millimeter again?" "Worse. They're classifying Vanna as a commercial vehicle. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a wheezing sound that I knew was Dave trying to stifle a laugh. He failed. A full-throated cackle erupted through the phone. "No way," he managed between gasps. "Vanna? She's about as commercial as my toaster. What makes her commercial?" "The lettering on the side," I said, my voice flat. "Apparently my name and phone number is an affront to the neighborhood's— what did they call it? Aesthetic integrity." Aesthetic integrity? This from the people who approved the color Grega for every mailbox post in a 5-mile radius. I hung up and looked out the window. And then I saw her. Carol Perkins, president of the Creekwood Commons HOA, self-appointed guardian of suburban mediocrity, and bane of my existence. She was across the street, wearing a pastel pink tracksuit and a visor, meticulously adjusting a plastic lawn flamingo with the focus of a bomb disposal expert. This was a woman who lived for the thrill of absolute, petty control. I decided to try the path of reason. It was a foolish choice, but I was young and naive. I grabbed the letter and marched across the street, forcing a neighborly smile onto my face. "Carol, hey," I started, holding up the envelope like a white flag. "Got your letter. I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding about my van." She turned, her own smile a tight, unmoving thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Alex, is there a problem?" She glanced at the letter. "Oh, the notice. No misunderstanding, I'm afraid. The bylaws are quite clear." "It's my personal vehicle, Carol. I need it for work," I explained, trying to keep my tone even. "The lettering is just so clients can reach me." She tilted her head, a gesture that was meant to convey sympathy, but landed somewhere near curious entomologist studying a strange bug. "I understand," she said, though her tone made it clear she didn't. "But the lettering constitutes advertising, which makes the vehicle commercial in nature. We simply can't have residents running businesses out of their driveways. It lowers property values." I almost laughed. "Lowers property values? Carol, your husband, Bill, wears black socks with brown sandals. In public. Let's not throw stones from glass houses about aesthetics." Her smile tightened another millimeter. It was a terrifying sight. "The rule is the rule, Alex. It's for the good of the community. The fine is due in 30 days. You can, of course, park it in your garage." She knew damn well it didn't fit. The cherry bookshelf was proof of that. My garage was a workshop, not a showroom. "Have a lovely afternoon," she chirped, turning back to her flamingo, giving its plastic wing a final proprietary pat. I walked back to my house, the beige letter clutched in my hand. The path of reason was a dead end. This wasn't about a van. It was about power. And Carol had just made a very, very big mistake. She hadn't just fined me. She had declared war. The first rule of fighting a bureaucracy is that you never, ever win by playing fair. I, however, had not yet learned this rule. My first move was to try and dismantle Carol's beige-colored tyranny with the most powerful weapon known to civilized man, a strongly worded letter. I spent an entire evening on it. I didn't just write an appeal. I crafted a legal treatise. I sat at my laptop, Vanna White parked defiantly on the street just beyond the HOA's jurisdiction, and channeled my inner discount lawyer. I used phrases like undue financial hardship, request for reasonable accommodation, and disparate application of community bylaws. I found a thesaurus and sprinkled in words like henceforth, heretofore, and egregious until the document sounded like it was written by a frustrated 18th century poet. To the esteemed members of the Creekwood Commons Bylaw Adjudication Committee, I began because starting with a lie is always a good strategy. I argued that the vehicle was duly registered for personal and professional use. I pointed out, with photographic evidence, no less than 17 other vehicles in the neighborhood with dealership frames, university alumni stickers, and pro sports decals, all of which constituted a form of external branding. Henceforth, I wrote, my fingers flying across the keyboard with righteous fury, it is my assertion that the selective enforcement against my vehicle, which is essential to my livelihood as a skilled artisan and tax-paying member of this community, constitutes a gross overreach of the association's authority. I printed it on the nice, heavy stock paper I used for client invoices. I signed it with a flourish. I sealed it in a crisp, white envelope and hand-delivered it to the HOA drop box like I was submitting a sacred text. I was playing their game, using their language. I was a fool. Exactly 8 days later, my appeal was returned to me in the mail. Tucked inside my own carefully crafted letter was a small slip of paper. It wasn't even a full sheet. It was a pre-printed form with a series of checkboxes. The one next to "Appeal Denied" was checked with a curt, aggressive tick mark. No explanation. No signature. Just a cold, bureaucratic finality. My blood pressure spiked. Fine. If they wouldn't listen to reason on paper, they'd have to listen to it in person. The monthly HOA meeting was the following Thursday. The community clubhouse room was a symphony of beige and despair. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and simmering resentment. I sat in a flimsy folding chair, surrounded by my neighbors, a collection of people whose primary hobbies seemed to be complaining and passive-aggressively trimming their hedges onto each other's property lines. Carol presided over the meeting from a folding table at the front of the room, flanked by her board of directors. A trio of retirees who looked like they'd been woken from a long nap and weren't happy about it. The agenda was a masterclass in petty grievances. Mrs. Gable from down the street delivered a tearful 10-minute monologue about a neighbor's garden gnome, which she claimed was staring into her kitchen window. It was, she insisted, an effigy of malice. This was followed by a 20-minute debate on the acceptable shade of taupe for exterior window trim. Finally, my item came up. New business. Driveway violation appeal, 412 Oak Street. Carol looked at me over her reading glasses. Mr. Peterson, you have the floor. You have 3 minutes. I stood up, my heart pounding a little. I had notes. I had my speech rehearsed. I laid out my case calmly and logically. I talked about being a small business owner. I talked about community and supporting local craftspeople. I talked about the arbitrary nature of the rule. I was passionate. I was eloquent. I was, it turns out, wasting my breath. When I finished, one of the board members, a man named Henderson, who I'm convinced slept with his eyes open, cleared his throat. "But the rule is the rule," he droned. "If we let you park your commercial van, what's next? People running taco stands out of their driveways? Blimp mechanics mooring their Zeppelins to the rooftops?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. "A Zeppelin? Henderson, it's a van." "The principle is the same," Carol cut in, her voice dripping with finality. "We have to maintain standards. The board has already reviewed your written appeal. We vote to uphold the violation." She looked at her cronies. "All in favor?" 3 tired hands went up. "The motion carries," she declared, banging a tiny gavel that looked like it came from a dollhouse. "Next item. A proposal to regulate the brightness of holiday lighting. I sat down, defeated. The sheer, unscalable wall of their obstinacy was breathtaking. They weren't interested in logic or fairness. They were interested in power, and my van was a convenient 6-foot-tall canvas on which to exercise it. Later that night, I was at The Rusty Mug, a local bar with sticky floors and cheap beer, recounting my public execution to Dave. "A Zeppelin?" he sputtered, beer threatening to shoot out of his nose. He actually said Zeppelin. "Word for word," I groaned, nursing my drink. "I'm telling you, Dave, it's hopeless. They've built a fortress of bylaws and beige paint chips." "So what are you going to do? Just pay the fine every week?" "I can't afford that. And it's the principle of the thing." I slammed my hand on the table, rattling our glasses. "I need to find a way around it. A loophole." "Good luck," Dave said, scrolling through his phone. "These HOA documents are written by corporate lawyers specifically to be loophole-proof." I pulled out my own phone and opened the PDF of the Creekwood Commons Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, a 112-page document of pure, soul-crushing legalese. I started scrolling, my eyes glazing over. "Okay, let's look at the actual text," Dave said, leaning over. "What does it actually say you can't have?" I found the section and read it aloud. "No commercial vehicles, trailers, boats, campers, or recreational vehicles of any kind shall be parked or stored in any driveway or on any street within Creekwood Commons." I kept reading. It lists everything. It's airtight. It's a verbal prison. "Okay, forget what you can't have," Dave said, his mind working in its own strange way. "What is allowed?" I scrolled to another section. It says, "Standard passenger automobiles, vans, and sport utility vehicles are permitted, provided they are not used for commercial purposes as evidenced by exterior signage or equipment." "Which is the problem?" Dave sighed. I kept reading. It also lists, this is weird. "What?" I squinted at the screen. It says, "Decorative lawn ornaments, including but not limited to statuary, fountains, and planters, are permitted, provided they do not exceed 6 feet in height and are maintained in good condition." A profound silence fell over our table. The jukebox in the corner was playing some forgotten 80s power ballad. The air was thick with the smell of stale popcorn. Dave and I just looked at each other. A tiny, insane little spark flickered to life in the back of my mind. A slow grin spread across my face. "Dave," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what if my van wasn't a van?" "What are you talking about?" he asked, confused. "It's the absolute model of vanness. It's the vannest van that ever vanned." "No," I said, the spark growing into a wildfire. "What if it wasn't a commercial vehicle? What if it was just a very, very large lawn ornament?" Dave stared at me, then at my phone, then back at me. His eyes went wide. "Oh my God," he breathed. "You're not going to—" "Dave," I said, my voice filled with a newfound, glorious purpose. "We're going to turn my van into a lawn." The decision was made. Vanna White, my trusted steed and mobile workshop, was about to undergo a transformation so profound, so utterly absurd, that it would either solve all my problems or get me committed. There was no middle ground. This was Operation Rolling Green. Our first mission took us to the cavernous, soul-sucking expanse of a big-box home improvement store on a Saturday morning. The place was a chaotic ballet of overflowing shopping carts, screaming children, and couples having quiet, intense arguments about light fixtures. Dave came along for moral support, and more importantly, because he had a pickup truck. I had a list. It was, without a doubt, the most ridiculous list I had ever written. Operation Rolling Green, supply list. AstroTurf, enough to cover a small zoo exhibit, or a 2015 Ford Transit van, whichever is larger. Adhesive, something industrial, something capable of bonding a space shuttle tile to the hull of the Titanic. Ask for it by name. Utility knives. A whole pack. These blades will see things no blades were ever meant to see. Miscellaneous lawn paraphernalia, plastic flowers, a gnome, a tasteful flamingo. The world is our oyster. We found the AstroTurf in the outdoor garden section. It wasn't just green. It was an aggressive, almost violent shade of green. It was the kind of green that doesn't occur in nature, the kind you'd see in a cartoon about radioactive aliens. "This is it," I said, running my hand over the plasticky blades. It felt like stroking a cheap, wiry wig. "Are you sure?" Dave asked, looking skeptical. "It's loud." "It's perfect," I declared. "It screams, 'I am a lawn. Do not question my lawnness.'" We flagged down a teenage employee who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. "Excuse me," I said with unwarranted confidence. "We need 12 rolls of this." He stared at us, then at the turf, then at our decidedly non-professional attire. "For what?" "Landscaping," Dave deadpanned. "A very vertical landscaping project." The kid just shrugged and got the forklift. The real challenge was the adhesive. In the paint aisle, we were confronted by a wall of glues, epoxies, and cements, each promising a bond stronger than the last. I explained my needs to an older employee with a magnificent mustache. "I need to glue fake grass," I said, "to the metal side of a van." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "You want outdoor carpet adhesive, the heavy-duty stuff. It's what they use to stick turf on concrete patios. Dries waterproof. Once it's on, the only thing taking it off is the apocalypse or a belt sander." "Sold," I said. Loading 12 giant, unwieldy rolls of AstroTurf into Dave's pickup was a slapstick comedy routine. We knocked over a display of ceramic pots, narrowly avoided decapitating a senior citizen with a rogue roll, and ended up with tiny green plastic fibers in our hair, our clothes, and our mouths. By the time we checked out, we looked like we'd been attacked by a Muppet. Back at my house, I faced a new reality. I was a woodworker. I knew my way around a router and a table saw. I did not, however, know the first thing about applying turf to a vehicle. My first attempt involved unrolling a section, slathering it with the tar-like adhesive, and trying to slap it on the side of Vanna. The result was a lumpy, crooked mess that looked less like a lawn and more like a chia pet with mange. "We need a professional," I sighed, peeling a glob of glue off my elbow. "A professional what?" Dave asked. "Is there a secret guild of automotive landscapers?" I made some calls. Most shops hung up on me, assuming it was a prank call. But then I found Gus's Custom Body and Paint. The place was old school, a ramshackle garage with the smell of oil, metal, and 50 years of hard work baked into the walls. Gus himself was a man who matched his surroundings, grizzled, covered in grease stains, with a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of granite. I nervously explained my plan, unrolling a small piece of the offensive green turf on his concrete floor. Gus looked at the turf. He looked at my van parked outside. He looked at me. He was silent for a full, uncomfortable minute, his face an unreadable mask. I was sure he was about to throw me out. Then a low rumble started in his chest. It grew into a wheezing cough, and finally erupted into the heartiest, most genuine laugh I had ever heard. He slapped his knee and wiped a tear from his eye. "An HOA," he gasped, still chuckling. "You got fined by an HOA, didn't you, kid?" "How did you know?" I asked, stunned. "Son," he said, catching his breath, "I've lived in this town for 60 years. I can smell HOA nonsense from a mile away. It's a special kind of stupid." He looked at the van again, a newfound respect in his eyes. "This is the dumbest, most beautiful act of defiance I've seen in 30 years. I'll do it, but you're paying for the weird job tax." The transformation took the better part of a week. Gus was a master. He treated the project with the seriousness of a classic car restoration. We became his begrudging, incompetent apprentices. Dave and I were tasked with making the precise cuts for the windows, headlights, and door handles. We had a surprisingly intense 20-minute debate about which direction the grain of the grass should flow for maximum aerodynamic efficiency. We got glue on everything. One afternoon, my next-door neighbor, Sarah, came over. I'd always liked Sarah. She was a graphic designer who worked from home, and we had a friendly wave and chat relationship. She'd also had her own run-ins with Carol over the non-native flowers in her garden bed. "Hey, Alex," she said, leaning against my garage door frame. "Not to be nosy, but your van has been gone for a few days. Everything okay?" I decided to come clean. I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of the half-finished rolling lawn in Gus's shop. Her eyes went wide. She stared at the photo, then at me. Then she burst out laughing. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated delight. "That is brilliant," she said. "Absolutely, certifiably brilliant. Carol is going to have an aneurysm." "That's the plan," I grinned. "Well," she said, her eyes sparkling, "if you need any help with the, decorative accents, let me know. I have an eye for this stuff." She wasn't kidding. The next day, she showed up at Gus's shop with a box. Inside were a dozen realistic-looking plastic daisies, a small, decorative white picket fence decal, and a ceramic gnome flipping the bird. "For curb appeal," she said with a wink. We glued the daisies around the gas cap. We applied the picket fence decal along the rocker panels, and we mounted the defiant gnome to the dashboard, our official mascot for Operation Rolling Green. Vanna White was no more. In her place stood a glorious green, 6-foot-tall monument to malicious compliance. She was ready to come home. The drive home from Gus's shop was the most surreal experience of my life. I was behind the wheel of a moving hedge. The world, seen from the cockpit of a grass-covered van, is a strange and wonderful place. People didn't just look, they stared. Jaws went slack. Phones came out. A car full of teenagers pulled up alongside me on the highway, windows down, screaming with laughter and giving me thumbs-ups. A little kid in the back of a minivan pointed with such frantic joy I thought his arm might pop off. I felt like the grand marshal of a parade nobody knew was happening. Every red light was a photo opportunity. I felt like a celebrity, if celebrities were also major fire hazards covered in synthetic turf. Pulling into Creekwood Commons was like breaching the gates of a beige fortress in a fuzzy green Trojan horse. I saw the first curtain twitch on Maple Street, then another on Oak. By the time I turned onto my own street, I could feel the collective gasp of the neighborhood. I slowly, deliberately, pulled into my driveway, the tires crunching on the concrete. I put the van in park, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, the gnome on my dashboard, my silent, defiant co-pilot. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out into my new reality. The silence lasted for about 15 seconds. First, Dave, who had been hiding in his own bushes across the street to witness the event, let out a triumphant war whoop. Then Sarah came out onto her porch, coffee mug in hand, and gave me a slow, impressed clap. A few other neighbors emerged, their faces a perfect blend of horror and amusement. Mr. Henderson, the Zeppelin theorist, just stood on his lawn, slack-jawed, shaking his head. And then she appeared. Carol's front door opened with a sharp snap. She marched out onto her perfectly manicured lawn, clad in a baby blue tracksuit that did nothing to soften her wrathful demeanor. She stopped dead at the edge of her property line, as if a force field were protecting her from the sheer audacity of my creation. Her face went through a beautiful, silent sequence of emotions. First, a blank confusion, as if her brain was refusing to process the image before it. Second, a dawning recognition. Third, a deep, profound disbelief. And finally, a glorious, vein-popping, pure, unadulterated rage. She marched across the street, her sensible sneakers pounding the asphalt. "Alex," she began, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "What is that?" I gave her my brightest, most non-threatening smile. "This? It's my lawn, Carol. My rolling lawn." Your what?" she sputtered. "My decorative lawn ornament," I clarified, gesturing grandly to the van. "As you know, commercial vehicles are prohibited, so I got rid of it. This is just a piece of lawn art. Per Bylaw 7, Section 8, it is under 6 feet in height and, as you can see, is being maintained in excellent condition. Freshly fluffed and everything." Her eyes narrowed to tiny slits. "You cannot be serious. That is your van. You've just covered it in a rug." "It's not a rug, Carol. It's turf. A symbol of verdant suburban prosperity," I said cheerfully. "See? No commercial lettering. Nothing to offend the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. In fact, I'd argue I've increased it. Who else has a mobile garden?" She was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. It was like her internal processor had crashed. She finally found her voice, a single, sharp word. "No!" She spun on her heel, marched back to her house, and slammed the door. I knew what was coming next. Less than 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street and parked at the curb. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a weary, seen-it-all look on his face. The other was younger, and he was visibly struggling to keep a straight face. They had clearly drawn the short straw for the day's weirdest call. The older officer approached me. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, his eyes flicking from me to the van and back again. We received a call about your vehicle." "You must mean my lawn ornament, officer," I corrected him politely. The younger officer behind him coughed, a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. "Right," the older one continued, his lips twitching. "Your lawn ornament. The complainant, a Ms. Carol Perkins, alleges that you're parking a modified commercial vehicle in your driveway in violation of a local ordinance." I feigned a look of deep confusion. "An ordinance? Officer, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I checked my HOA bylaws very carefully. Is there a city law against making one's property more beautiful? I'm just trying to increase my home's curb appeal." The officer sighed, a deep, soul-weary sound. He looked at his partner, who just shrugged, his eyes wide with amusement. He turned away and spoke into the radio on his shoulder. "Yeah, dispatch. We're on scene at 412 Oak. It's a civil dispute. Looks like an HOA thing." He paused. The vehicle in question is covered in AstroTurf. Another pause. No, I'm serious. It looks like a giant chia pet. Advise complainant this is not a police matter. He turned back to me. Look, sir, it's not breaking any state or city laws as far as we can tell. It's registered, it's insured, it's not a traffic hazard. This is between you and your homeowners association. He lowered his voice slightly. My advice? Get a good lawyer and a sense of humor. He tipped his cap, and the two of them got back in their car, the younger one finally letting out the laugh he'd been holding in. Their departure was a victory lap. Seeing the police leave without citing me, let alone towing the rolling lawn, sent a ripple through the neighborhood. The story was out. My phone started buzzing with texts from friends who had heard from friends. Before long, a van from a local news station pulled up, tipped off by a neighbor who thought the whole thing was hilarious. A reporter with impossibly perfect hair tried to interview me, asking what kind of statement I was making. I'm just a man who loves lawns, I told her, deadpan. Carol, meanwhile, had gone nuclear. She emerged from her house armed with a clipboard and a digital camera, taking photos of the rolling lawn from every conceivable angle, muttering to herself like a mad general planning an impossible siege. An hour later, a new notice was stapled to every lamppost and mailbox post in Creekwood Commons. Printed in a large, angry font, it read, Emergency HOA meeting tonight. 7:00 p.m. Community Clubhouse. Agenda: to address the grass menace and uphold community standards. The gauntlet had been thrown. This wasn't just about a van anymore. This was a battle for the soul of Creekwood Commons. The hours leading up to the emergency meeting felt like the pre-game show for the Super Bowl of suburban warfare. My house became the unofficial headquarters for the rebellion. Dave came over with a 6-pack of beer and a bag of pretzels, appointing himself my chief of staff. Sarah arrived shortly after, but instead of snacks, she brought a binder. Okay, she said, setting it down on my kitchen table with a satisfying thud. I used to be a paralegal before I went into design. I spent the afternoon dissecting every word of the HOA covenants. We're going to beat Carol at her own game. For the next 2 hours, the three of us huddled around the table, transforming my kitchen into a legal war room. Sarah was brilliant. She had highlighted every ambiguity, every potential loophole, every poorly defined term in the 112-page document. Okay, look here, she said, pointing to a line. The bylaw says lawn ornaments must be maintained in good condition. It never defines good condition. You can argue that your lawn is in perfect condition. It's drought-resistant, pest-free, and never needs mowing. And this part, she continued, flipping a page, it says the Architectural Review Committee has authority over any structure. But it defines a structure as something affixed to the land. Your ornament is on wheels. It's mobile. It's arguably not a structure at all. We built our case piece by piece. It was no longer just a joke. It was a calculated, legally fortified act of defiance. My role was to be the face of the revolution. Dave's role was to provide sarcastic commentary. Sarah's role was to be our secret weapon. As a final touch, just before we left for the clubhouse, I went out to the rolling lawn. I placed a tiny toy lawnmower on its hood next to a miniature plastic sprinkler. What's that for? Dave asked. Theatricality, I said with a grin. Every good presentation needs props. The community clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only. I'd never seen more than 10 people at one of these meetings before. But tonight, it seemed the entire neighborhood had turned out for the spectacle. The air was electric with gossip and anticipation. I saw faces I hadn't seen in years. It was part town hall, part public trial, part circus. Carol stood at the front, her face a mask of grim determination. She banged her tiny gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Creekwood Commons Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice trembling slightly with righteous indignation. "We are here to discuss a serious and unprecedented threat to the aesthetic integrity and property values of our community." She launched into a dramatic presentation, clicking through a slideshow of the photos she'd taken earlier. There were close-ups of the turf, shots of the picket fence decal, an extreme close-up of the gnome on my dashboard. She spoke as if she were a prosecutor presenting evidence in a capital murder trial. "This thing," she said, gesturing to a blurry photo of the whole van, "is a monstrosity. It is a mockery of our rules. It is a blight on our peaceful neighborhood. It is, to put it plainly, an affront to everything Creekwood Commons stands for." A few of her cronies in the front row nodded solemnly. But in the back, I could see people rolling their eyes. A few were even suppressing smiles. "I am putting forth a motion," Carol declared, her voice rising to a crescendo, "that the board immediately issue a summary fine of $1,000 to Mr. Alex Peterson, and that he be compelled to remove the covering from his vehicle within 24 hours, or face further legal action." She finished, breathless, and looked around the room, expecting a wave of applause. Instead, there was an awkward silence. Then I raised my hand. "I'd like to address the motion." Carol glared at me. "Fine, you have 3 minutes." I walked to the front of the room, calm and collected. I didn't have a slideshow. I just had Sarah's binder and the truth. "Good evening, everyone," I started, making eye contact with my neighbors. "My name is Alex, and yes, that is my rolling lawn out there. And I have to say, Carol, I'm a little hurt. You call it a monstrosity. I call it art." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "Now, Carol is right about one thing," I continued. "This is about our rules. I read the rules. In fact, I've read them so many times I think I have them memorized. And my lawn ornament complies with every single one of them." I calmly, methodically, took the room through Sarah's research. I talked about the definition of a structure. I talked about the lack of a definition for good condition. I talked about the 6-foot height limit. "The bylaws state that a lawn ornament must be aesthetically pleasing," I said, pausing for effect. "Now, I know beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but let's be honest. It's green. It's tidy. It never needs watering. Frankly, it looks a hell of a lot better than Gary's dying hedges over on Maple Street." The room erupted in laughter. Even Gary, a sheepish-looking man in the third row, cracked a smile. "This was never about a van," I concluded, my voice firm. "This was about vague rules being used as a weapon to bully a resident. And I'm not the only one. Who here hasn't gotten a notice for leaving their recycling bin out for 2 extra hours, or for having a basketball hoop that wasn't the approved shade of black?" Hands started going up. Voices started murmuring in agreement. Mrs. Gable, the garden gnome lady, stood up. "She fined me because my welcome mat had too much whimsy," she declared. The room descended into chaos. The meeting was no longer about my van. It had become a referendum on Carol's entire reign of terror. A motion was made from the floor. Not to fine me, but to hold a vote of no confidence in Carol as HOA president. The motion to fine me was defeated in a landslide. The motion to remove Carol passed with a cheer. Her face went pale. For the first time, she looked utterly defeated. Finally, a third motion was passed to form a new committee, with me and Sarah as founding members, to review and simplify the entire book of bylaws. I walked home that night feeling 10 feet tall. Sarah was by my side, and Dave was on my other, clapping me on the back. We stood on my porch for a moment, looking out at the magnificent, ridiculous, triumphant, rolling lawn, gleaming under the streetlight. It was no longer just a van. It was a local landmark, a symbol. The next morning, my phone rang. It was a new client. "Hi, is this Alex's Artisan Woodcraft?" a man's voice asked. "I saw your, van on the local news last night." "That's me," I said, bracing myself. "Hilarious, man. Absolutely brilliant. Listen, anyone who can put that much creative energy into fighting an HOA is someone I want building my furniture. I need a new dining room table. You free to talk?" I leaned against my doorframe, looking at my absurd creation. It had cost me time, money, and a significant amount of my sanity. But as I scheduled the consultation, I couldn't help but smile. So, did I win? I guess. Still have to drive around in a van covered in fake grass, which makes going through a car wash a bit of a challenge. But every time I see it, I'm reminded that sometimes the only way to fight stupidity is with a little bit of glorious, unapologetic, well-manicured absurdity. And hey, I never have to mow it.